Like we said at the top, we're going to try to have an honest conversation about where we are with this subject of mass shootings and tragedies, etc. And frankly, if we're honest with each other, we're stuck in a vicious cycle. Yet another mass shooting, yet nothing ever seems to be done on a national level. It happens seemingly every few weeks. If you're angry, you should be. I'm as well. And for once, or at least very clearly, so is the president. Yet a simple thing like universal background checks can't get done even though the vast majority of the American public want them, including people at my table even voted to try and get that done. Now, same thing when it comes to a federal database on gun sales. Nothing crazy, nothing exotic, no repeal of Second Amendment stuff, just background checks and databases that practically the law enforcement folks should be able to access. Now, both Republicans and Democrats who were asked about it, they want it. But at the end of the day, what gets done? Yes, the echo chamber of silence. So we wanted to play you an extended chunk, if you missed it, of what the president said last night. And I, for one, who is as cynical as the next guy, felt it was genuine, felt it was authentic, and I think it spoke for the vast majority of Americans. He said it pretty much exactly 24 hours ago, and here it is.
As I said just a few months ago, and I said a few months before that, and I said each time we see one of these mass shootings, our thoughts and prayers are not enough. It's not enough. It does not capture the heartache and grief and anger that we should feel. And it does nothing to prevent this carnage from being inflicted someplace else in America. Next week, or a couple of months from now. We don't yet know why this individual did what he did. And it's fair to say that anybody who does this has a sickness in their minds, regardless of what they think their motivations may be. But we are not the only country on earth that has people with mental illnesses or want to do harm to other people. We are the only advanced country on earth that sees these kinds of mass shootings every few months. This is a political choice that we make to allow this to happen every few months in America. We collectively are answerable to those families who lose their loved ones because of our inaction. When Americans are killed in mine disasters, we work to make mines safer. When Americans are killed in floods and hurricanes, we make communities safer. When roads are unsafe, we fix them to reduce auto fatalities. We have seatbelt laws because we know it saves lives. So the notion that gun violence is somehow different, that our freedom and our Constitution prohibits any modest regulation of how we use a deadly weapon, when there are law-abiding gun owners all across the country who could hunt and protect their families and do everything they do under such regulations. Doesn't make sense. So, tonight, as those of us who are lucky enough to hug our kids a little closer, are thinking about the families who aren't so fortunate, I'd ask the American people to think about how they can get our government to change these laws and to save lives and to let young people grow up. And that will require a change of politics on this issue. And it will require that the American people, individually, whether you are a Democrat or a Republican or an independent, when you decide to vote for somebody, are making a determination as to whether this cause of continuing death for innocent people should be a relevant factor in your decision. If you think this is a problem, then you should expect your elected officials to reflect your views. And I would particularly ask America's gun owners who are using those guns properly, safely, to hunt, for sport, for protecting their families, to think about whether your views are properly being represented by the organization that suggests it's speaking for you. And each time this happens, I'm going to bring this up. Each time this happens, I am going to say that we can actually do something about it, but we're going to have to change our laws. And this is not something I can do by myself. I've got to have a Congress, and I've got to have state legislatures and governors who are willing to work with me on this. I hope and pray that I don't have to come out again during my tenure as president to offer my condolences to families in these circumstances. But based on my experience as president, I can't guarantee that. And that's terrible to say. And it can change.
The president said very upfront and clearly he would politicize this issue. Some criticized it, some said it was overdue. Let me bring in our panel who have both opinions and also a place at the table in this debate. Shelley Mayer, she's a Democratic Assemblywoman representing Yonkers. To her left is Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. Elliot Engel is a Democratic congressman from New York, and Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. The president today said, Congressman, that he was going to talk about it because that's really what he could do and it was up to Congress. I asked this to the Senate a little earlier, but I didn't get a direct answer. Should the president be the standard bearer for this? Some argue that after Newtown, he kind of handed up to Congress because they thought he'd be toxic to the debate for some that needed swaying, that were on that margin, making it harder for them to vote yes and get reelected. This time around, should he take point on this?
Definitely. I think his statement was eloquent. It was heartfelt. It was a Barack Obama at his best, doing what he does the best. And he's absolutely right. Those of us that are for sensible gun control laws, like myself, are frustrated that year in and year out, we have these terrible massacres and nothing gets done. I mean, this was horrific. Newtown, where little children were mowed down. I mean, if there was one thing that I thought might get us shaking and moving on it, I thought it would be that. Nothing. The truth is that the IRA, the gun lobby, they have a monopoly. They have they control so many things. And when you leave a place like New York, the mindset is totally different when you get out in some of the other parts of the country.
Well, let me ask you. There was a moment after Newtown, I think we all felt, the president again gave an impassioned address. I think we all went home, looked at your kids and said, my God, that could have been me. Newtown was any town. Then you had that tone-deaf address by the NRA, and you said, all right, there's a moment here. Did we not get the legislation then because they tried to do too much? They tried to do 4 things with it, from the assault weapons ban, et cetera. Should they just have done the background checks? Or was the thing always doomed to failure? It just took longer to get killed because it was such a horrific tragedy, and everybody remembers those little white coffins.
The NRA, the National Rifle Association, they have a stranglehold on this. I don't think it would have made a difference. I think that they have objected to every kind of common sense gun control legislation that the average American would say, yeah, makes sense. That's why I think the president's speech was so good.
But we saw the numbers. I mentioned it to the senator. 90% of the American public can't agree on anything. And 90% of the American public more said, we need universal background checks. We need to have a database that every state's got to play ball with. And 75% of the NRA's own members agreed with that too. So because I know you've put through gun legislation, individual bills that you've gotten co-sponsors, you're trying to get them through. When you get a guy in the hallway, okay, could go either way on this, have you had a moment where one of them says, Elliot, I want to vote for you this, but I can't because just philosophically, I can't do anything that restricts the Second Amendment? Is it because they're afraid of the NRA, or is it they're afraid they're not going to get reelected if they vote yes?
I think it's all of those things. I just think it's all of those things. I think that the NRA has an attitude that even the smartest, most sensible change in gun control will start a slippery slope and will erode their Second Amendment rights. So they don't even want to look at it, even a crack. And I don't see it changing. I mean, I wish I could give you a different answer,
yep.
But I've been in Congress for a while. It's pervasive in the Republican Party, and it's pervasive in some parts of the Democratic Party as well. There are those of us that live on the coasts in New York and California and some of these places.
Well, that's a perfect segue, because you guys passed the SAFE Act, okay?
After Newtown.
Some guys don't have their jobs now because they supported that. Same thing with gay marriage. Some Republicans took positions in New York State and don't hold elective office after that. My question is, I know it's a blue state, I get all that, but why were you guys able to get it over the hump that in a lot of other states, including blue states, they still haven't gotten any gun control legislation passed, even after the Newtown tragedy?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons. One, honestly, credit to Governor Cuomo. He set his mind to this. We did it promptly after Newtown, so those images were fresh in people's minds. Frankly, the NRA, to the Congressman's point, does not have the kind of clout throughout New York State. A significant portion of the state legislature is from downstate New York, where the NRA is much less a factor. I'm very proud on my wall. I have an email from an NRA member in my district who withdrew his membership after Newtown, and he's a person who used a gun for sporting and other things. Obviously, a gun owner, but their position is simply out of sync with, I believe, most Americans. And to the Congressman's point, they don't have the kind of political control in New York State. So Republicans and Democrats from upstate could vote for that bill. They taken heat, no question about it. I took a lot of heat afterwards, and I represent a downstate community. But very few members thought they were going to lose their jobs. And honestly, to this point, this is an issue on which some people are going to have to vote to lose their jobs, in my opinion. Someone with courage is going to have to vote to lose their job.
And I think, Dom, you need a president, and for all, I'm sorry, I had a big problem and still do, the president chose, and maybe Democrats supported the idea, that after Newtown, he was going to make his address. He welled up. There were genuine emotions. I have no doubt in my mind about it. But then he left it to Congress. And then we know what happened at that point. He's got a year and change left. He's not running for another election for the rest of his life. If he wants to, maybe at the expense of other issues that he'd love to get done before he leaves office, he could make this a signature issue and bang it every single time. I'm sure he could get donors who would write huge checks. There's a former mayor from New York City that they could get together on something if they want to spend private dollars to try and do an ad campaign like we've never seen before in this country, to say, background check. That's all we're asking, a background check. You can still get your guns. You're going to wait 24, 48, 72 hours, whatever it is, but we're going to find out who you are before you walk out of the place with a gun.
Great idea. I think everyone at this table would support it. But at the end of the day, it would be almost a waste of the president's time to finish his agenda. The fact of the matter is, Richard, his hands are tied. And if you listen to what the congressman said for the first 2 minutes, it's so accurate. Think about this for a second. What he said just now, And the point that was reinforced. We all feel strongly about gun control in the Northeast. But right outside New York and every other state in America, they feel almost the exact opposite of the way that we do.
But here's my own point, Dominic. I'm not trying to bore everybody with stats tonight. That's not true.
Richard, yes, it is true.
Of gun owners believe, no, NRA members believe in background checks.
That's just a poll, and this is what I keep trying to tell you guys. The people that give their opinion in a poll have no power, for the most part, as to what their representative in Washington does. So the NRA, and that's why they could pass the SAFE Act in New York, as the Assemblywoman expressed, because the NRA does not have the stranglehold, and I mean literally the stranglehold, with New York lawmakers as they do in places like Idaho and Wisconsin and on and on and on.
Okay, but here's where I won't wave the white flag like he will, okay? Maybe he's right, and I can certainly point to what happened in Colorado. Colorado, after Aurora, they passed a similar legislation to the SAFE Act, and soon thereafter, you had the head of the legislature who was basically looking for work and a whole bunch of other folks who were moved out. So that proves your point. But how many other issues in American history, Andrew, have we heard it's too intractable, it'll never change? The idea, frankly, that Dominic would be able to go to college in the South in a certain time in this country would have been seen in an anathema. The idea that we curb drunk driving in this country, you get people to put a seatbelt on or whatever, seemed like you can. It's a cultural thing against America. There are ways to curb norms, or at least accepted norms, without saying we can't do anything about it, move on to the next one.
There are ways, but it's a long game, and that's the way the president would have to focus. Yeah, he could do yeoman's work banging the drum on this and softening the ground, maybe make it an issue in the 2016 campaign, and maybe set the stage for something to happen in the next administration, assuming that a Democrat wins the White House. But he's not going to be able to do anything the remainder of his term. I mean, Congressman, you would know this better than anybody at the table. I can't imagine any substantial piece of gun control legislation gets through before President Obama leaves office. So, I mean, he could try on hearts and minds and see if maybe he can change some of the numbers and some of the positions.
Could you imagine a new president, I don't care who it is, that would make this the #1 issue of his or her agenda? It just won't happen.
No presidential candidate's going to make this the #1 issue on their agenda.
Back in 1994, Democrats had the majority, and Bill Clinton was president. We passed an assault rifle ban. And what happened the next election? We lost the election, and it's widely, not the only reason why we lost it, but it's widely accepted that it was one of the major reasons that we lost it. The Australia and the UK started to have not as much of this trouble like we have, but they passed an assault rifle ban and background checks, and the murders of these types dropped by 50%. So
in the aftermath, in the Australian example, in the aftermath of a tragedy, they gave people 10 days. You bring your guns in, we'll pay you back for them and everything else, but you got 10 days to bring them all in. And as a consequence, as you said, my point is that the dirty little secret here? If you don't do something in the first week or two of this, like you did in New York with a governor who pressed the issue soon thereafter, you can't let it drift because we have attention span fruit flies in this country?
No, I'm sorry, I just want to say, the president said tonight, after that interview that you had, basically voters had to make this a single issue vote.
Yes,
and he was talking about—
He was even stronger today.
He was stronger
than
today.
he was last night.
And I don't think we should leave the sense of this conversation that there is nothing that can be done. He basically said, even if it's not your only issue, you need to make it your only issue in voting so that folks, to the extent that you're right about the polls, so that the person feels the pain.
Do you think if a presidential candidate made it an issue? Let's say a Democrat said, if you elect me, I will vote to have universal background checks. Does that cost you or get you votes?
I don't think there's any question that many candidates, Democrat and Republican, are being incredibly fearful of saying anything about guns, but I think it takes courageous leadership for a nominee of our party, to do the right thing at this moment in time for America. Does it come with risks? It absolutely does.
The number of single-issue voters on guns who support gun rights, gun expansion, far outweighs and outnumber the people who make it a single issue for gun control, even in blue states, even in our area. The people for whom that's the #1 issue, they tend to be pro-gun, not gun control.
Okay, we've been talking about some of the political realities, frankly, surrounding this. Well, when we come back, a look when it comes to how predictable these tragedies have actually become here. Some of the cold, hard numbers and how it's making us even madder about the country's inability to deal with it. We'll have some of the facts surrounding this and more after this.